all of them led to dead end. All of them were in a box. And the idea now that she would go back and live a Mormon life felt horrible to her. It felt untrue. And she was very upset because that was her belief and she didn't know what she should do. She had already lived a life that was just in like the world and normalized. And when she looked at that life in a controlled way, it was horrible as well. And they just started to just crumble in her mind. She tried to put herself, leaving the hotel, going back to her old life and living that out. And it literally collapsed and it couldn't hold itself in her mind and her body was distraught. It just started sobbing and it was trying to access somewhere. What was she supposed to be like now? If the church wasn't true and the priesthood wasn't true, what were they supposed to teach their children? And what were they supposed to live at? And what was their truth? And is there the priesthood and God? And what was this all about? And what about the scriptures? Questioning the mind and is there God? I want to preface the next part with just an overview of what her life looked like in her day-to-day. Her belief was, as she came through her 20s and had a whole bunch of life experiences that were not finding the right romantic partner and then coming back to her beliefs in the church because she was baptized into the church when she was 8 years old and then left it as a college student and eventually came back because what was programmed into her was that there was this thing called eternal marriages and that you have a partner that you could marry, a priesthood holder that was righteous, and you could go to the temple and you would be married for eternity and you would have a family and you were sealed together. There's special ceremony in the Mormon temples and it's such a beautiful and sacred ceremony and life that you could live. And she had a blessing when she was 18 that was recorded and it's called the patriarchal blessing. And it said that she would marry one day in the temple. So she found that blessing and read it in her 20s and decided that's finally what she wanted. So eventually she went back to church and she connected with a man. They married. They had 2 children together. She had already had a child from another relationship and he had children from another relationship and then they married and eventually they got sealed in the temple. She was an avid temple goer. She would go into the temple, she would pray, she would get answers in temple, she read the scriptures, she did scripture reading with her children, she homeschooled, she really lived her religion, she volunteered at the church, she followed the script. When she came back into the Mormon religion after her college and wild years, she really lived it. She questioned everything before she decided that this is how she'd raise her family. She had a strong belief of eternal life with her family and sealed, and she taught her children about this until the last child was born. And the last child, she couldn't teach about any of this because the last child that was born was crying all the time, in pain all the time. And this is what led to questioning everything because in her other children, she was able to read Bible stories and all of this stuff and really program into the child about God and Jesus and the Mormon religion, because that's what you do as parents. You just take your beliefs and you put it into your child. And then that's just how it's done, whether it's Mormon religion, Christian religion, Catholicism, spiritualism, it doesn't matter. That's just, we think we know the answer and the truth. So then we take our programs and we like do it a little bit better than our parents and we put them into our children, and the earlier you can start them, the better it is. And of course, none of that is brainwashing. That's just what you do. You got to teach the child something and you teach them what you believe. So she was very much invested in that. No drinking, no smoking, literally living her religion, being a kind person in the community, all of that stuff. And this journey started to shake that foundation because she was read, she started to dig deeper to find answers inside of the scriptures to what she was doing in the healing world. And it reached this pinnacle point at this conference that maybe she should question God because she had never really seen God. And everybody else was in the course. Maybe 2 or 3 people were completely high level advanced beings that were esoteric, and the others were on a similar journey, or some just were raised atheist and still were there. So it was a beautiful melting pot of synchronicity with people from different backgrounds and countries. Even there's people from France and Germany, America, Canada. So you had it all there. It was a small intimate group that started to connect with one another. And then they, as we broke for lunch and all those things, she asked other people, like, do you think there's a God? Do you believe in God? How were you raised? She was so curious now, this one point of God. What were you taught about God? And every person she asked, including her husband, God, do you think there's a literal God? I know what we believe, but they all said, I don't know. Even the guy teaching the course couldn't give a complete answer. Now, he did give a complete answer in Are You God? But the question came into place, but who created that? And if there was a God, who created that? And who created all these universes? And did you know that there's universes? And did you know that there's dimensions? But this question it became an obsessive question in her mind to really know. She really wanted to know, okay, let's really talk about this. She started talking about it deeply with her husband. Is there a God? Like, I know what we believe. I know we have the priesthood, but we should question. And look at all these people. They're good people. Some believe there's a God, but never really seen it. And then there's this, we all can grasp that there's like these dimensions and different types of spiritual worlds. And there's other planets and universes out there. The Mormon teaching in the advanced doctrine taught this. And is there a God? And so this was a 3-day course, and she became very obsessed with this one question to know, and asked everybody, what did you believe? One person was raised in Germany behind the Berlin Wall, and they were there when the wall came down, and on their side of Germany, they were taught and raised that nature was God. It wasn't a Christianity thing. It was just like everything's kind of one with nature, and you weren't necessarily atheist, but that was your God concept. And it was like so fascinating. And again, everything was always in this head, these voices, these ideas, and pulling them out and being able to ask herself. And the course started to draw out of them, like, her and her husband, we have more power than we think, and who's really judging you? Are you judging yourself? And she was feeling so good in her body, and she had already decided, people have fantasies in my body. If I'm a healer, I'm a healer. If I have indigenous roots, I should be able to heal people and do shaman work. And if I want to dance and move my body a certain way because I feel this way, I should be able to do that. So all of these energetics were happening in her cells, and she just felt good and happy and free in one level and conflicted in another. But the course allowed them to just try to flow with what the course was offering. And they, at the end of the course, on the second night, they all were going to go in Las Vegas and dance at a bar. That was part of the event. And they were going to go to this high-end place and dance and stay together as a group, and very exclusive, and just went along with it because it was fun. We wouldn't go as Mormons to a club and dance in Vegas, but I knew dancing, I knew clubs as the old self, because the old self would go to the bars as a college student. So that part was exciting for her, because that remembrance was in the cells of how fun that is. And she wanted to dance with her husband or just dance. And so off they went. And she was having the most incredible time on the dance floor and just let it all out, like danced, and just all those kind of fantasies where you just dance and move your body a certain way with your partner or whatever. And she wasn't dancing with her husband. He didn't really want to dance, so he was just letting her dance. And he started to experience his own conflict and contraction, and everybody there was having their own experience. It drew up a lot of your suppressions and all of these things and emotions. And she was having her own and expanding and breaking free and feeling really great and expanded, and just chains coming off, where his experience was more contraction. All the stuff that he hadn't worked on, questioned, looked at, was starting to present itself, and he didn't like being there anymore, and he got really intense, and they had to leave. And in that experience, because she was very in tune, and then even more heightened in tune with everything that was going on, suddenly could see her husband's contraction to the point where he was very upset. I'm very upset with her. And she was so free in her body. She could hear him without him actually talking, and feel all of the contraction in him of anger, and him not knowing where it was coming from, and directed at her. And she didn't feel the need to defend it, but also felt it so intensely on every level in her being, which just in one way, with her expansion and her freedom and dancing and moving, she didn't feel the need to defend her natural way of just experiencing happiness and joy. And the opposite emotion coming from him, which was maybe the feeling or expression of jealousy and not knowing where to place it, and feeling insecure and contracting everything in confusion. And as they rode up the elevator to the 21st floor and got into their room, she was and had enjoyed the experience on the dance floor, and he had not. And the experience within both of them was like a yin and yang, and opposite. One was expansion and one was contraction, and they both could feel it, to the point where, out of all the years of being married and knowing her partner the way she knew him, felt in a moment that he was not happy, and he did not like anything about this experience that she was experiencing, and literally looked like he would not recover, and wanted out of the situation, out of anything, and not have to deal with this, and also put her back into a construct and a belief, because fear was very strong in that moment, that something had busted and he had no control over. And she felt all this and didn't really conceptualize it, but felt the pain and the anger and the stress and the desire to push that and put it on her, and for her to defend herself and her actions and behavior. And in her expansion, she absolutely could not defend it. And in that moment, because she had learned to question her own mind and take responsibility, if there was any responsibility to be taken from her own mind, that she would do that. So she would do that from the point that she could not lie. Her partner's uncomfortable contraction that wanted to place something on her, she didn't want it, and she could not lie by defending herself or her actions or behavior. And she also felt if she spoke, it would, anything that came out of her mouth to try to explain her behavior would be met with such attack. And she could only just lay there, and they both just laid there, one contracting, one expanding, trying to figure out how to address this layered situation that wasn't just about that moment, it was about every moment, because all leading up to this was about contraction and expansion and questioning. So in that moment, because of her being able to question herself, she recognized that she could only speak if she spoke from her own experience and not from his experience, because she really didn't know his experience, because he wasn't being truthful. She could see he was so contracted and suppressed, he didn't know where the anger was coming from, and therefore she couldn't talk to that. She had to question within herself her own behavior. So she started to speak to him from this point. And what she said was, I'm questioning everything. I'm questioning what's happening. All I can say is that I really enjoyed myself dancing, and I'm really confused by why God would give me this body. And when I danced, I felt so freeing and so good. And yet, it's in our religion that would look bad. That would be considered bad. You don't do that, especially dancing on the dance floor with another person that's not your spouse. And there was no dancing from this point of like sexual energy, what that she was aware of. It was just more freedom from like chains that had been on her, and that she could freely dance. And so she explained this experience within herself of how it felt to her, and the confusion in her head with why God would give her a body that could move. And when it heard music, it could just freely express. But because of the decisions they had made together to live a Mormon life and to live a certain way, you weren't allowed to do that because it was against God. But God also gave her this body. And that's what she explained in her confusion, because that was her questioning and that was her truth, and she didn't understand it. And as she spoke from this point, he could hear her. And as she kept speaking about this, his contraction started to soften, because the question there was, even though one was contracting energy and one was expanding energy, it was the same conflict question. What is happening? Why, when we want to live a certain way, we decided to put ourselves in a container of, we believe this to be truth, that you have to put off this natural flow inside the physicality if you're doing no harm. What does it all mean? And in this was so profound, and because they were both now questioned that together, she asked him if he knew the answer to that. Why? And he did not. He said, I don't know. And she said, is there a God? What do you believe? What? And he said, I don't know. And it was a truth he never expressed before. And together, the question in the mind brought to the forefront their religion and everything that they had experienced together through being sealed, and the dynamics of the religion and how that played out, and her belief in it, and her desire to reach the celestial kingdom, pay tithing, and really kept both of them there doing the right thing. And if it wasn't for her, a lot of things he had a gray line, but she just wanted to do it right morally. And now they were conflicted, because what do you feel about the priesthood? You have the priesthood, you have to know there's a God. What's your experience? She started asking him, and he was like, I don't know. And I'm like, we have to figure this out. Look at all these people. And she started talking about the course and what people were saying, and this person. And she started getting like into her mind in asking all of these questions. And then her body just started to sob. She started to cry uncontrollably because she couldn't figure out the answer. And she just started to purge, and her mind was just trying to find the truth. And suddenly she realized that all of these things she believed about her religion and how she lived her life, and even governments and all of these things, it started to crack in her mind, and she started to see in her mind her belief crumbling. She started to speak out loud and question in her mind out loud for the first time. Like everything that she'd been doing inside of her mind and asking about the lies and all of this stuff she started to voice it, that everything is possibly a lie. Do you know, we lied to yourself. Why is my mind doing this? Why do I, like, what is this all about? If I can't dance freely in my body, why is that evil? And the moment she spoke these things inside of her mind, because it was all like in this space, as if you are just viewing yourself in a screen, even though you're in the bed. And because her partner didn't have answers, she asked him if the Mormon church was true and if the priesthood was true. And she really wanted a solid answer from someone who was supposed to know God. And he said, I don't know. And this destroyed her emotionally. And she started to cry and cry, because if he didn't know and she didn't know, what the heck were they doing? And this was, they put their whole life on this. And then suddenly it might not be true. And then what is true was the question. Then what is true? Are there multiverses? Is this what we're learning is true? What's the 12th dimension? Why aren't we taught this? Will the scriptures say this? And then she was just going and she was seeing everything. She was seeing how they had already known that there were entities, government entities, and medical structures, and lots of structures that already they knew were hindering at the nth degree, that there were lies and suppressions, and they knew enough of that already. So inside of her mind, she asked what this was all about then. Why were they doing this? And why would they live? Why would she live a life to get to another life later that was supposed to be beautiful and lovely in the celestial kingdom? And in order to achieve that, you had to live in a box and not be free. Not like, you put rules on yourself and you contract yourself and you don't fully live your truth, because she could see that there was things she wanted to do and didn't do it because she's working only for this one thing. And her mind started to break, and she started to ask, if, what should I believe? And is there a God? And she started talking to God. God, like, I don't know what to do. And she started to see her whole life of how she lived in this one truth to get to the celestial kingdom. And she was sobbing and crying, because what she was seeing was her self-honesty, and all the things she had questioned, none of those led to the answer. All of them led to a dead end. All of them were in a box. And the idea now that she would go back and live a Mormon life felt horrible to her. It felt untrue. And she was very upset, because that was her belief and she didn't know what she should do. She had already lived a life that was just in like the world and normalized. And when she looked at that life in a controlled way, it was horrible as well. And they just started to just crumble in her mind. She tried to put herself leaving the hotel, going back to her old life and living that out. And it literally collapsed, and it couldn't hold itself in her mind, and her body was distraught. It just started sobbing, and it was trying to access somewhere. What was she supposed to be like now? If the church wasn't true and the priesthood wasn't true, what were they supposed to teach their children? And what were they supposed to live at? And what was their truth? And is there the priesthood and God? And what was this all about? And what about the scriptures? And as she spoke, her husband softened and was very concerned too that he didn't have the answers, and just said, we'll figure this out together. And it wasn't enough. She couldn't stop, and she cried and cried. And every time she tried to access a life that she could live in the one that she was living, it crumbled in her mind. It just wouldn't let her live it. and then once it crumbled, it would go, like it would just disappear. And so she would bring up another scenario of how maybe she could live in the world, and then that just felt awful to her. And then another one, and all of this trying to access God and find out the truth about God. So she actually had a thought that God that I know of, that I've read about, could reveal himself to the most righteous, those that were most righteous with faith, that had enough faith to believe, if I want to see God, God can reveal itself because my faith makes it. And she held on to that thought. And this was all going on inside her head, by the way. This was conflicted. Some of the things she spoke out loud, a lot of it was in her head. This went on for hours, that it seemed, could not stop crying and crying and crying as each system collapsed, because everything was left empty. And there's a lot of fear in not knowing how to live in the world if you didn't have your beliefs. And she questioned it all, the school system, doctors, like just everything, every belief she had, like that there was a purpose behind it and there wasn't. And she didn't know where to place herself. So she decided, based on this one principle of faith and scripture she had read in the book of Enoch, the concept is like, if you had so much belief and faith, God would have to reveal himself to you. And that's where Enoch saw God's finger. And so this is it. Out of everything, I have faith that God can appear. And I have faith that God can reveal himself to me based on my current faith, that I have done everything correct, that God would reveal himself to me. So she intended this with all of her might in her head, and said to God, you get in this effing room right now with your literal son, Jesus Christ. You, God, as the man, come and present yourself in this room right now. When I open my eyes, I better see you just like I know I am in the flesh, and I better see you right now. That was her belief, that they were tangible beings, and they were not an apparition, that they could appear. And the moment she said that, the way that she said it was her belief from the concept of her religion. Like it was tied in with her image of what she was taught from a belief in a story. So she had made that her truth, and therefore she expected it 100% that they would then appear. Now, this occurred, so the thought that occurred was so fast, and the moment that it was asked with such intention, the answer immediately, she knew that was not going to happen. That was a lie. That what she believed wasn't how it worked, and that's not what was going to happen. And then that singular thought, it was so powerful of a realization that the truth of how she thought it should happen just collapsed the rest of the system, because she had built her whole system in the mind on that imagery, their imagery, like that if she willed it, they would come exactly like the Mormon church had depicted in the pictures and in the stories. And it would be this God, and Jesus Christ, her brother, and they would appear, and this would, and in that moment, everything collapsed to a point that was painful in the realization inside of her system. And she couldn't even speak. It just broke her. It's like breaking the TV. It's just when you know there's a TV, but you don't realize like the images are coming through some kind of like fake illusion thing, camera, and then somebody busts it and you realize that was just a TV, like the images in there weren't real. And so it busted everything and it collapsed from that point. It just pulled down her whole structure, her whole reality she had created. It pulled everything with it. And she didn't know what to do. She just was broken with the reality. That's not how it works. And she tried to explain this to her husband and she could not. She then tried to, as the experience was painful from the perspective of, when you realize you've been lied to, there's just this pain point in there. It's not like someone stabbing you with a knife pain, but it feels very painful in all of the parts of you that maybe you don't view as physical. So for her, when all of that collapsed, she panicked in her mind and started to try to find, it's like drowning and trying to come up and then stand on the land again. So she was falling and drowning in her mind and realized that she just was like, had nothing to believe in anymore. She had nothing to believe in. And she had to believe in something in order to live. So that was the next thing. So, okay, this isn't true. And I'm basically have no beliefs anymore. There's a truth here. Where is it? And when she went to look, it was empty. It was just like she decided in her power, she would made an agreement that, okay, you know what? Fine, it's not true. I'll just go back and live my life as a Mormon and I won't question anything because I just need to believe something. If I'm going to be here on earth, I got to believe something. So I'll just choose to believe that. And the moment she said, I will just believe that, I'll go, and she pulled up the image, how she would go back and she would, and that also just, as soon as she pulled it up, it just disappeared. Like, absolutely not. You cannot, once you've collapsed it, you cannot live that. And she just started to try to find something that she could believe in. And she started just pulling up at grasping at straws for everything that she knew is how a human should live in the world. She was just like, I'll do that. I just have to believe in something.